You know that moment in life when you realize the person you thought you knew, the person you shared DNA and childhood memories with, is a complete and utter stranger, a villain in human skin? I lived that moment, and it was devastating. It happened the day I found out my younger sister, Vanessa, had used the legal documents I'd created to protect our parents, to instead betray them and kick them out of the house I bought for them, claiming she and her family needed it more. This is not just a family fight over money. This is a story about generational sacrifice being hijacked by pure, self-entitled greed. I spent 5 years clawing my way up the corporate tech ladder, sacrificing my 20s, my weekends, and my peace of mind. Why? To give my parents, who had worked minimum wage jobs their entire lives just to keep a roof over our heads, the retirement they deserved. A beautiful, mortgage-free home. And in one brutal, calculated move, my sister turned that gift into a weapon and evicted them. She didn't just hurt them. She humiliated two people whose greatest sin was being too kind. And when I found them sitting amidst their packed boxes, crying on the porch of the house I'd gifted them, I swore I would not only take back the house but utterly dismantle her life. Let's go back to the beginning, because you need the context of our family dynamic to understand the depth of Vanessa's entitlement. I am Sarah, the elder daughter. My whole life, I was the pragmatic one, the one who handled the hard truths. I worked hard. I put myself through college, taking out loans and working 3 jobs, waiting tables, tutoring, and doing data entry, to earn my computer science degree. This wasn't just ambition, it was necessity. I remember the exhaustion of those years, the smell of grease ingrained in my clothes from the diner, the red pen marks on my papers when I fell asleep studying. Why? Because my parents, bless their hearts, had nothing to give. They poured everything they had into simple survival, always just a paycheck away from disaster. There was no inheritance, no college fund, just unending love and support, which frankly was worth more than money, but couldn't pay the bills. My current life is a high-stress, high-reward role as a lead software architect for a major Silicon Valley firm. My success is tangible, measured in stock options and salary, but every cent represents a memory of struggle and a promise to my parents that their hardship was not in vain. My sister, Vanessa, was the total opposite. She was the golden child. Not because she was particularly talented or ambitious. She was average in school and never held a job for more than a year, but because she was charming, dramatic, and emotionally demanding. She was the family's soft spot, the one who always needed to be saved. Mom and Dad stretched themselves thin to buy her a new car for college, which she totaled 6 months later, paid for her generic liberal arts degree, and always bailed her out of minor financial scrapes. Vanessa never developed an internal sense of accountability. She married her high school sweetheart, Tom, a perpetually aspiring real estate agent whose primary skill was complaining about the market. Tom's professional history reads like a graveyard of doomed ventures. A luxury dog grooming service that lasted 3 weeks, a failed cryptocurrency consulting agency, and a brief, disastrous stint selling essential oils. They were perpetually broke, living a life of instability and constant financial drama, forever renting the shabbiest places in decent school districts, always relying on my parents, and eventually on me, for emergency loans I knew would never be repaid. The turning point came 2 years ago. My parents were both in their early 70s. Dad had retired due to failing health, specifically chronic back pain and early-stage COPD from years working near industrial fumes. Mom was working part-time at a grocery store just to cover his expensive nebulizer and medications. They were still living in the old, 2-story house they bought in the 80s. The house with the leaky roof, the steep, carpeted stairs that were a nightmare for Dad's bad knees, and a single, ancient, constantly failing HVAC unit that made winters unbearable and summers humid. The house wasn't just old, it was actively making them sick and unsafe. I realized then that my financial success, I was earning well over 6 figures, was meaningless if I didn't use it to secure their comfort immediately. I made a decision that felt right down to my soul. I would buy them their dream retirement home, a place built for aging in place. I found the perfect house about 20 miles away, in a quiet, tree-lined suburb known for its safety and accessible amenities. It was a single-story ranch, flooded with natural light, a small, meticulously maintained garden, and modern fixtures, including a walk-in shower and a brand new climate control system. It was priced at $550,000. I didn't hesitate. I walked into the bank, liquidated a significant portion of my stocks, and bought the house with a single cash payment. It was the largest single transaction of my life, but seeing the look on my parents' faces, Dad, for the first time in years, completely relaxed, Mom crying tears of pure relief, was worth every penny. It was my gift of peace, a lifetime annuity of comfort. This is where my fatal mistake occurred. A mistake born of naive generosity and a misguided attempt to include Vanessa. My corporate lawyer, an excellent man named Mr. Henderson, explained the legal complexities of gifting a high-value asset, especially concerning future inheritance taxes and potential long-term care needs. He suggested placing the house in an irrevocable trust to protect the asset absolutely and prevent any future familial disputes. However, Dad, clinging to the idea of simplicity and avoiding complex government filings, insisted on a revocable trust. Mr. Henderson cautioned me, "Sarah, a revocable trust leaves the asset open to external influence or abuse by the trustee, even if your parents are named the primary beneficiaries with the right of occupancy. If you aren't the trustee, you are giving up direct control." But Dad looked sad. "Vanessa feels left out, honey. If she's the trustee, she'll feel responsible. It's good for her, gives her something serious to handle." I, in a weak moment of longing for family unity, ignored Mr. Henderson's sound advice. This revocable trust was drafted with the intention of protecting the asset and defining roles clearly. Grantor, donor, me, Sarah. I funded the trust entirely. Beneficiaries, Mom and Dad, with the explicit right to lifetime occupancy. The house was their home until they chose to move or passed away. Trustee, administrator, this role was the mistake. To give Vanessa a sense of responsibility and inclusion, since she lived locally and I traveled often, I, against the initial advice of Mr. Henderson, named Vanessa as the sole trustee. I was convinced she would feel honored and take the responsibility seriously. I thought she would finally grow up and see this as her chance to contribute to the family's well-being. Vanessa was ecstatic. She wasn't just given a title. She was given control over an asset worth $500,000. She constantly talked about how professional she was going to be, setting up separate accounts for property taxes and home maintenance. My parents moved in, and the first 6 months were a dream. The house was bright and warm, and Dad's mobility improved drastically without the stairs. They finally had the rest and dignity they deserved. But Vanessa's true colors began to show in small, unsettling ways. She started treating the house like her own side project. She criticized my parents' simple, worn furniture, insisting they needed upgrades to match the house's prestige. "It just brings down the neighborhood aesthetic, Mom," she'd chirp. She demanded I cover the cost of refinishing the hardwood floors in the guest room and replacing the mailbox with a more stylish one, citing it was an essential improvement to the trust asset. I paid, of course, but the requests felt mercenary. She wasn't managing the house for them. She was polishing a potential inheritance for herself. Then the true crisis hit. Vanessa and Tom's perpetual instability finally caught up with them. Tom, after being fired from his 5th real estate job in as many years, the latest failure involving an egregious ethical lapse he blamed on a nasty competitor, defaulted on their lease. They had 30 days to move out. Their landlord, understandably, wasn't accepting any excuses. In a panicked phone call that sounded more like a desperate command, Vanessa asked my parents if they could temporarily stay at the new house. She swore it would only be for 2 months, just until Tom stabilized his new business idea, which involved selling custom-printed coffee mugs and t-shirts with motivational quotes, a venture doomed from the start. My parents, soft-hearted and desperate to help their struggling daughter, immediately agreed. They just couldn't say no to her tears. The 2 months of temporary stay turned into a living hell for my parents. Vanessa, Tom, and their 2 small children moved in, instantly annexing the spacious master suite and the largest living area. My parents were relegated to the small guest room, which became a cramped, sad little space, smelling faintly of mothballs because they had to pull out old blankets they hadn't used in decades. The house quickly filled with chaos. Tom quickly claimed the two-car garage as his business headquarters, filling it with boxes of unsold mugs, a loud vinyl cutter, and cheap printing equipment, making the space unusable for Dad's modest woodworking hobby. Dad's workbench, his sanctuary, was shoved against a damp wall and covered in Tom's trash. The atmosphere shifted from a peaceful retirement haven to a hostile, crowded battleground. Vanessa stopped referring to it as Mom and Dad's house and started calling it the family asset, or our future inheritance. The passive aggression was relentless. The kitchen, Mom used to cook small, simple meals. Now, Vanessa and Tom dominated the kitchen. Mom and Dad were often eating dinner at 5 p.m. because Vanessa needs the stove free for her meal prep, which was usually Tom's massive, greasy breakfast burrito preparation for the next morning. The noise. Vanessa's children, adorable but undisciplined, ran wild. Dad needed quiet for his rest. Vanessa scoffed, saying, "They're just kids, Dad. This house has life in it now." The parents had to retreat to their tiny guest room by 7 p.m. every night. The bills. Vanessa insisted on paying the utility bills herself from the trust account, but then demanded my parents sign forms authorizing every single expense, making them feel like they were stealing from her. Mom started calling me, tearful and hushed, describing how she felt like a guest in her own home, constantly apologizing for taking up space. "I just go outside to the garden when they're awake, Sarah. It's quieter out there." The horror peaked when Dad, struggling with the small guest bathroom, slipped on a wet rug and bruised his hip badly. It wasn't a catastrophic injury, but it was a terrifying reminder of their fragility. He was scared, and all Vanessa did was complain that he had tracked mud onto her refinished floors and ruined her expensive bath mat. "It's so much maintenance for them, Sarah," she lamented to me over text. "They can't handle a house this size. It's not fair to the trust asset." That was the last straw for me. I called Vanessa and told her their 2 months were up, and they needed to move out immediately, regardless of Tom's non-existent mug business. Her response was chillingly composed, utterly devoid of empathy. "I can't do that, Sarah. I've made a hard decision as trustee." "A hard decision? What are you talking about? It's their home." I screamed into the phone, the rage bubbling up. She continued, using the cold, clinical language of the legal documents she was supposed to be upholding. "The house isn't big enough for 6 people, Sarah. And as the trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to manage the asset for the maximum benefit of the beneficiaries, or the trust itself. Right now, the maximum benefit is stability for my children and equity preservation. My family needs this neighborhood, this school district. Your parents, on the other hand, would be better off in a low-maintenance, cheap rental apartment. This house is too much work for them. I am protecting them from the burden of upkeep." She was using the trust agreement against me, twisting the phrase maximum benefit to mean whatever benefited her lifestyle. She had found a loophole and was making a legally sound, but morally bankrupt argument. She was staking her claim. My parents were devastated. They called me 2 days later, sobbing uncontrollably. They had received an official, typed document, a 30-day notice of eviction. It was signed by Vanessa as sole trustee of the Smith Family Trust. She hadn't just made an argument. She had taken action. She had officially evicted my elderly parents from the home I bought for them, their primary and only asset. I flew home the next morning. The red-eye flight was agony. My hands shook the entire journey, not from fear, but from a cold, focused fury I had never felt before. I was going to war. I drove straight from the airport to the house, which now felt foreign and hostile, a stolen sanctuary. I found my parents on the front porch. They weren't inside. They were sitting on 2 small, frayed folding chairs, surrounded by 5 or 6 neatly stacked cardboard moving boxes labeled Mom's keepsakes and Dad's books. They looked utterly defeated and frail. My mother's eyes were swollen red, and my father was sitting silently, holding a small, chipped box of his old military memorabilia, his chin trembling. "We didn't want to make a mess," Mom whispered, standing up to hug me. "Vanessa said it would be better if we had things packed when we left. She said you would help us find a nice apartment. She said it was for the best." The sight of them, my kind, self-sacrificing parents, reduced to refugees on their own porch by their own daughter, broke something fundamental inside me. The guilt over the revocable trust mistake was a physical weight on my chest. I gently settled them back down and walked straight into the house. Vanessa was sitting on the sofa, which I recognized as a new, expensive model she must have charged to the trust, scrolling through her phone, perfectly composed. Tom was in the kitchen, making himself a massive breakfast burrito, the grease odor heavy in the air. The house smelled like indifference and entitlement. "What in the hell did you do?" I didn't shout. My voice was low, laced with absolute venom, quiet enough to feel dangerous. Vanessa barely looked up. "I did my job, Sarah. As the trustee. Look, I know you're emotional because you paid for it, but legally, it belongs to the trust, not to you or them. I'm protecting the asset. We're going to use the equity to enroll the kids in the private school down the street, which is an investment in the family's future, by the way, and Tom and I will pay the property taxes. Your parents can rent a place for $1,500 a month and still have plenty of their Social Security money left over. It's fiscally responsible." Fiscally responsible? I choked out a laugh that was more of a wheeze. You have never been fiscally responsible a day in your pathetic life. You and Tom are parasites. You didn't do this to protect the trust. You did this because you finally saw a way to take a $550,000 asset for yourselves. Tom wandered in, wiping grease on a napkin, looking indignant. "It's not taking, Sarah. It's smart use of available resources. We're finally getting ahead. You should be proud Vanessa finally showed some business acumen." I looked at Tom, who always managed to sound entitled while being perpetually unemployed, and then back at my sister. The betrayal was complete. "You don't get it, do you? I bought this house for them. The trust was a technical shield, not a weapon. You have fundamentally violated your fiduciary duty. You evicted the very people the trust was created to serve, forcing them to sit on the porch like refugees." Vanessa finally stood up, her face hardening, putting her phone down. "Look, the paperwork is done. The law is the law. If you want them to stay, you can pay my family market rent, or you can find them an apartment. This is my home now. And you need to leave." That was my breaking point. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked out, gathered my weeping parents, and drove them straight to the nicest, closest extended stay hotel I could find. I secured a 2-bedroom suite, paid for a month up front, and promised them, "I will fix this. You will never have to see Vanessa or Tom again, and you will have peace." The next call was not to Mom or Dad, but to Mr. Henderson, the corporate lawyer. He listened patiently to the whole sordid tale of betrayal and exploitation. "Ms. Smith," he said, his voice grim, "Vanessa has made a deeply unethical move, but she has technically committed a breach of fiduciary duty by acting purely in her own self-interest and against the spirit of the beneficiary's best interest. Since you are the grantor, we can and will move immediately to revoke the trust and remove her as trustee. We will also sue for noncompliance, damages, and the recovery of funds she misused, like that new sofa. We need to act fast before she tries to take out a helic on the house." We launched a full-scale legal assault. Within 48 hours, Mr. Henderson filed an emergency injunction and a lawsuit. The first step was issuing a court-mandated notice of immediate removal of trustee and a cease and desist on all actions concerning the property. The key to our case was proving that her actions were solely for the benefit of herself, the future beneficiary, and actively detrimental to the current beneficiaries, the lifetime occupants. I wanted the final confrontation to be clean, legal, and absolutely crushing. 2 days later, Mr. Henderson and I drove back to the house. The sight of Vanessa's children's cheap plastic toys scattered across the manicured front lawn infuriated me. It was a visual metaphor for the chaos she brought. Vanessa opened the door, looking smug and defiant. "Did you bring the first month's rent for your parents? Because if not, you're trespassing, Sarah." Mr. Henderson stepped forward, calm and professional, handing her a thick packet of sealed legal documents. "Ms. Smith, I am Mr. Henderson, counsel for the grantor. This document confirms the immediate revocation of your status as sole trustee. Furthermore, due to multiple acts of breach of fiduciary duty, including the illegal eviction of the beneficiaries, you and your family are hereby given 7 days to vacate the premises. You are now considered squatters on private property, and any attempt to liquidate or borrow against this asset will result in criminal charges. Vanessa's face went through 3 distinct stages: arrogance, confusion, and then absolute panic. You can't do this. I'm the trustee. I have control. You can't just undo a trust. You had control, I interjected, stepping close to her, my voice steel cold. And you used it to kick out the only people in this world who ever gave a damn about you. You chose to weaponize my generosity, and that is a direct violation of the trust's intent. You lost the title the moment you put my father on the porch. Tom stumbled out of the garage, drawn by the commotion, smelling faintly of stale coffee and desperation. What's going on? We just started setting up Tom's mug empire. You can't interfere with our business operations. Your empire is collapsing, Tom, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Tell me the truth, Vanessa. You weren't managing the asset. You were planning to take out a second mortgage, weren't you? Using the house equity to fund Tom's next disaster before my parents even passed away. She broke. The composure shattered into a million pieces, and she started screaming and crying hysterically. We needed capital. We needed a fresh start. We can't afford this neighborhood otherwise. You have so much, Sarah. Why can't you just let us borrow the house for a couple of years? It's family. You don't know what it's like to struggle. Struggle? I yelled back, finally allowing the rage to surface. I struggled for 10 years working 3 jobs. You just choose to be a burden. Family doesn't try to make their elderly parents homeless to fund a coffee mug business. I threw the words at her like stones. You don't deserve this house, this neighborhood, or the name of our family. You have 7 days to leave. If you are here on day 8, the sheriff will be here to escort you and lock you out. I left them standing there in their newly annexed, now stolen house, screaming about fairness and my selfishness. It was the most satisfying walkaway of my entire life. The legal process was swift and brutal. Within the week, Vanessa and Tom were forced to move out, their belongings piled unceremoniously into a battered U-Haul. My lawyer confirmed their evacuation and reported that they left the house in a state of deliberate disarray, minor damage, and shocking filth. Retaliation, pure and simple. We recovered the house, but I knew my parents could never feel safe there again. It was tainted by betrayal and the memory of their humiliation. I immediately hired a crew to clean the place and listed the house for sale. It sold quickly, and with the full $550,000 recovered, I bought my parents a beautiful, smaller, fully secured condominium in a top-tier, low-maintenance retirement community 20 minutes from my own home. This time, I put the title entirely in their names, making them the sole, outright owners. No trusts, no loopholes, just outright ownership and security. Vanessa, Tom, and her children are now in absolute no-contact NC. I blocked their numbers, their emails, and every social media account. I have heard through old family friends that they are back in a cheap rental, and Tom is selling custom dog leashes now. My parents mourn the loss of their daughter, which is a grief I see in their eyes every day, but they finally have the peace they deserved. I lost a sister, but I saved my parents and my integrity. The emotional cost was high, but the alternative, allowing their humiliation to stand, was unthinkable.